Hi, my name is Bob Grinier and I'm a volunteer with the Martin Fleischmann Memorial Project. So welcome this 5th of October 2025, where we will be ending the Nano-Thermite 911 hypothesis for the World Trade Center catastrophic event. Thank you for joining me. How are we all today? This lovely Sunday, early autumn day. I've been enjoying the weather over the last couple of days. I really like the crystal clear skies we get at this time of year. So, hi Pyro Pedals, hi Green Hiker, hi Chiffy, hi Geartrones, hi Joe Villici, hi Artifact, great to have you here, Corky Goss, 911 a revisionist, great to have you here. Also, hi Alex Lozman, hi to, we've got quite a quorum here. This is very good for a start. Thank you Stone for joining us, Estonias. Thank you also to Little Fish and Todd Hall, First Sword, wonderful to have you here. And we have a guy on a donkey, which is always good to have. We must have guys on donkeys. Daz Pizzazz and Starfish Troopers are also here. And welcome from South Africa. Yes, we have a quorum from all over the world. That is absolutely fantastic. So, what do you think? Are we going to make a splash today? Are we going to make a splash? Who can say? Well, first up, I just want to give you a little bit of a look at what I presented in the blog leading up to this presentation today, which was, I'd never really looked at Stephen E. Jones' work, really, and that's probably a shame. So on remote view today, I trail it as such, ending the Nano-Thermite 911 hypothesis for the World Trade Center catastrophe. And this is our character, Stephen E. Jones. And he basically was in the field of muon catalyzed fusion right there at the beginning. And this was a huge field right when Pons and Fleischmann came in with their request for funding, for which Stephen E. Jones was requested as a peer to review. And well, essentially, I have two large volumes from around this time of the international conferences, hardbound. People from all over the world were discussing muon catalyzed fusion. And in fact, if you go and look at his 1987 paper that was published in, I think, Scientific American, it was called cold nuclear fusion. That is in 1987, and it shows a reactor where they would have deuterium and tritium in a gold-lined steel chamber, and they would produce these muons, and then they would fire them through the walls of the chamber, and they would catalyze about 250 fusion reactions between deuterium and tritium. The problem is that to break even, you need to have about 1,000 reactions triggered. Well, I didn't realize actually before I started this part of this presentation in the last week that he had actually called cold nuclear fusion, muon catalyzed fusion, cold nuclear fusion in 1987. But he again called it the same kind of thing. So that was this paper here, which was 24th of July 1987. Cold nuclear fusion, Scientific American, United States, there is the code. But he actually has a paper which was fantastically well cited. And that is actually April 1989 with a research index score of 318. This is absolutely massive. And a citations number of 637. So if you listen to Anatoly Klimov this week talk about the fact that all of his papers going back to the 1970s on ResearchGate have got in total, collectively, nearly 1,000 citations. That puts it into context how big this number of citations for a single paper is. And the paper was called Observation of Cold Nuclear Fusion in Condensed Matter. And it was published in April 1989. And this was 35 days only after the work of Pons and Fleischmann, the announcement rather. So you can see this kind of fraught situation where, you know, who wanted to get ahead of the game. And essentially what this work is talking about is using various electrolytes to load deuterium into either palladium or titanium electrolytically, and claims that that is production of neutrons, that is to say commensurate with a fusion process, and therefore some sort of cold nuclear fusion must be going on. And this was published in Nature, no small feat there. So actually those that say that cold fusion has never been published in Nature, the main journal, they are wrong. This journal has published this one with a massive number of citations by Stephen E. Jones. Now the interesting thing is, he was actually talking about trying to find an explanation for the helium-3 that is observed coming out of, you know, volcanoes or whatever it is. That has to be produced by some sort of fusion process, and this is what he was trying to achieve. And essentially he was saying that cold fusion processes, whatever they are, were going on inside the Earth, but he didn't say that it was caused by muons. He said that there was some other quasi-particle that was somewhere between an electron and a muon, and in his theory, and in the theory of muon catalyzed fusion, a heavier kind of electron would would be closer to the nucleus of a isotope of hydrogen, and therefore if you had two hydrogen nuclei with at least one of these with a heavier type of electron close to it, it would bring them together so that they would fuse spontaneously with a much higher probability. And so what was this thing? Well, I actually read the paper, and you know, one does this from time to time, and a number of things. So this is the quasi-particle, and I suggest that the quasi-particle was actually an idiotic vacuum object. And why do I say that? He was building on his earlier work in the 1980s, which was on piezo nuclear fusion, and he's saying that that is actually going on in the Earth. He's saying that that is what is causing this production of 3 helium. So maybe it says here. Yeah, well, anyway, he said it's, yeah, in his conclusion, he says here, the correlation ideas regarding cold piezo-nuclear fusion with observations of excess 3 helium in metals and in geothermal areas of the Earth led to our experimental studies of fusion in electrochemical cells, which began in May 1986. Our electrolyte composition evolved from geochemical considerations and changed as results were observed. The presence of fusion neutron signal was consistently produced, although at the rate varied widely, and so on. So he's suggesting that this is going on in the Earth, and that they were effectively replicating this process. Now, he used iron sulfate in there, and he noted that the iron was building up on the electrode, and I argued that that is because EVOs are in the electrode and they are pulling iron out magnetically out of the solution. And they are creating these iron conglomerations, and the iron conglomerations then are actually allowing something to allow more EVOs to bind to. And this is something that Matsumoto observed, that is that iron itself is the only metal that he tested that would allow these structures to bind to them. And if that's the case, then after a while it gets blocked from allowing the deuterium to migrate electrolytically into the, according to his theory, into the palladium or the, thank you very much, Avalon, or the titanium. And so that's why he believes it's shutting down. But because he's saying it's piezo nuclear processes, we can argue that piezo effects, like in a quartz crystal, produces a spark, like the sparker on a sort of a cigarette lighter. And moreover, the spark itself has an exotic vacuum object, that is an energy soliton, that is a static electricity chunk at its initiation. And therefore, his own understanding with our modern understanding allows us to understand that there are EVOs or energy solitons going on in the process that he was doing. Now, he argues that the lithium is coming out of a normal DD fusion reaction. I argue that it's probably coming from something similar to identified in Kladoff's work when he added lithium chloride, and that is to say it is coming from an interaction between the hydrogen isotopes and lithium. In the case of Kladoff, I said it was moving towards from 7 lithium to 10 lithium using proton additions. That could also include from 6 lithium, and gets to 10 lithium, and that decays in zeta-seconds, like almost nothing, to 9 lithium, which produces a neutron. Then the 9 lithium will decay, if there's no other interactions, to 8 beryllium, with also potentially, for half of the likely times, to 8 beryllium with another neutron coming out. And if you look at the energy calculations, they are covering the range that was observed in his experiment. And this was my intuition, and then I couldn't believe my luck, because his actual scintillation tube in his experiments was doped not with normal lithium, not with 7 lithium, but with 6 lithium, which is the isotope you would need to achieve this using deuterons, because what you would have is 6 lithium plus 2 deuterons plus 2 electrons plus 2 cold antineutrinos in the exotic vacuum object energy soliton phase singularity topological monopole would lead you to 10 lithium, and then that would do the decay back, producing the neutron signatures. So there we go. Essentially, what he might have been proving even prior to the published works, or around the time of the published works of Ken Shoulders, was that there was some sort of particle, but he would argue it's something like a muon and that it's bringing these nuclei together. I would argue that it's actually causing a aggregation of a whole bunch of particles, and they are simultaneously coming together to produce a product that then decays, producing the neutron, and that quasi-particle is in fact an exotic vacuum object. And so it turns out, I feel like the luckiest guy alive. It doesn't matter which way you go, whether it's new experiments, old experiments, classified data or whatever, or even things like Anatoly Klimov's work. Everything becomes more easy to explain when you think of it in terms of the driving force between coherent energy transformations. It just becomes fairly trivial to explain. Anyway, cold fusion wasn't his own only story for which he received a lot of interest. The other one was for his thoughts about 9/11, and apparently he did not, like many other people out there in YouTube's land and internet's land, believe the official hypothesis, and he was claimed by some people to have resigned his position, but in fact he was placed on paid leave on September the 7th, 2006, because of controversy over his 9/11 theory. And this is very interesting date, this, because this actually predates getting any samples from WTC dust. This this whole thing predates getting any samples. However, you'll see that it is potentially related. He announced his retirement on October the 20th, 2006, and was effectively focusing on the research into 9/11 from January the 1st, 2007. The thing about it is that his accumulated reads for his papers on the subject of 9/11 it eclipses all of his other published articles since 1983. And in fact, I think the main paper alone eclipses all of his papers put together. And I think probably with me talking about this, he's going to have a whole bunch more reads and research interests. But to be fair to him, he was on the money thinking, and his colleagues were on the money thinking that some novel process is going on in the Earth, which is producing new isotopes or actually doing fusion within the Earth. He was right about that. I firmly believe he was right about that. And so due credit to him. Also, I think also credit to him is that it was some kind of particle. He wasn't specifying what particle it was, but there was some type of quasi-particle that was enabling these fusion events. And so I think probably we need to be fair to Stephen E. Jones that he really was ahead of this. Also, you know, he probably did want to find an explanation to what was going on in 9/11. And, you know, it's weird that his other science didn't really inform on that. But anyway, okay. All right, so I saw a question earlier. If it's a question I'm going to answer in the course of the thread, I will answer it. It says, Avalon is asking, hey Bob, how do you think whatever it was that destroyed the WTC Center was deployed? Was it a device inside the buildings, somewhere nearby, or satellites? I'm not really going to be focusing on that. I think as easy as you're going to see, it is to deal with the so-called Nano-Thermite idea. I think the idea of planting, say, a nuclear device inside the building is even easier. And maybe I'll address that another time to eliminate from the possible hypothesis. So for those out there that don't know, there are four main hypotheses for how the events occurred. There's the government hypothesis. There's the next leading candidate, which is the Nano-Thermite hypothesis. There's the outlier, which is allowed to be talked about, which is, I think, Jim Fetzer's mini nukes, or people have discussed mini nukes. And there's one that's not allowed to be discussed. And so I will continue with looking at his paper on the subject, and then we will break down what is wrong and how we can understand the actual truth and get to it. Okay. All right. Okay. What we will do, and I've just deleted it, have I? No. Yes. No. Okay. Here we go. So we'll come up here. All right. We'll go there. So this is the paper, which has, when I downloaded it, it had 68,826 reads. I think it's now at 70,200 and something reads. So you guys have been either doing a lot of reading or someone else is discussing this around this time. I don't know, but obviously it's a topic which needs to be addressed. And I think, to be fair to all of those people that died and the world that has suffered because of the restrictions and impositions on our freedoms that were instigated as a result of the events, we need to get this right. And that's a kind of thinking that Stephen E. Jones was motivated by to explore what he explored. We need to get this right. It shall not be forgotten. For the people that died, the people that were killed as a result of defending the idea of freedom, whilst also everyone getting it taken away. Okay. All right. So, active thermitic material discovered in dust from the 9/11 World Trade Center catastrophe. So, Niels Harrit, Jeffrey Farrar, Stephen E. Jones, Kevin R. Ryan, Frank M. Leggett, Daniel Farnsworth, Greg Roberts, James R. Gooley, and Bradley R. Larson. So the claim is, we have discovered distinctive red-grey chips in all samples we have studied of the dust produced by the destruction of the World Trade Center. Okay, but I can accept that. The red material contains grains approximately 100 nanometers across, which are largely iron oxide, while aluminium is contained in tiny plate-like structures. Separation of components using methyl ethyl ketone demonstrated that elemental aluminium is present. The iron oxide and aluminium are intimately mixed in red material. You will see that this is in fact the case. Numerous iron-rich spheres are clearly observable in the residue following the ignition of these particular red-grey chips. This will not be the focus of, this last comment will not be the focus of this particular talk. This particular talk will just be dealing with removing the nanothermite idea entirely using historical understanding and the facts. The facts are these, that what he presents is scanning electron microscopy and X-ray energy dispersive spectroscopy, that's EDS. And over the last half decade, nearly a decade, I've become, more than a decade I'd say, I've become quite familiar with how these tools work, their limitations, but also I kind of get to recognize now things that are under the microscope. When you've seen a lot of different things and a lot of different forms of things, you start to recognize what you're seeing under the microscope. Anyway, so that will become clear. The destruction of the 3 skyscrapers, WTC 1, 2 and 7 on September the 11th, 2001 was an immensely tragic catastrophe that not only impacted thousands of people and families directly due to the injury and loss of life, but also provided the motivation for numerous, expensive and radical changes in domestic and foreign policy. Yes, guys, I couldn't agree with you more. For these and other reasons, knowing what really happened that fateful day is of grave importance. I agree, it's the right motivation to study this. The collapses of the 3 tallest WTC buildings were remarkable for their completeness, their near free fall speed, interesting, near free fall speed, their striking radial symmetry, yes, and surprisingly large volume of fine, toxic dust that was generated. In order to better understand these features of the destruction, the authors initiated an examination of this dust in June 2007. Why is that important? Because it was in January 2007 that he officially retired. So Dr. Stephen E. Jones in June 2007 observed distinctive bilayered chips with both a red and grey layer in a sample of the WTC dust. My notes are here. He was on paid leave from Brigham Young University on the 7th of September 2006, amid controversy over his 9/11 theories. He announced his retirement on October the 20th, 2006 in what was described as an agreement with the university, electing to retire to focus on his research. Yes. His retirement became effective on January. So this observation was after he officially retired. Initially, it was suspected that these might be dried paint chips. Interesting. So right off the gun, he's saying that he thinks that, I suspect that these might be dried paint chips. But after closer inspection and testing, it was shown that this was not the case. They're laying down hard. And he's dismissing a potential hypothesis. Okay, right there and then. All of the samples examined contained these very small, peculiar red-grey chips. Some studies of the dust confirmed the finding of iron-rich microspheres, which are also peculiar. Not to us, of course. One sample was collected about 10 minutes after the collapse of the second tower. In a paper presented first online in autumn 2006, interesting, regarding anomalies observed in the World Trade Center destruction 6. Okay, so what paper are we talking about? He's talking about reference 6. Reference 6 is Jones SE. Why indeed did the World Trade Center buildings completely collapse? And this was Journal of 9/11 Studies, 2006. So in the autumn, he presented that data. Okay. A general request was issued for samples of the WTC dust. All right, so at the time that he actually was encouraged to, how should we put this, be suspended or encouraged to retire, or he decided to retire, he had only actually asked for samples of dust. And here we go. The expectation at the time of asking for those samples of the dust was that careful examination of the dust might yield evidence to support the hypothesis that explosive materials other than jet fuel caused the extraordinary, rapid and essentially total destruction of the WTC buildings. Right, so before he had received a single speck of dust, before he had received a single speck of dust, he'd already promoted the idea that some other kind of explosive, other than the jet fuel, must have been responsible for the observed near free fall demolition in very symmetrical sense of those buildings and the extremely fine toxic dust. He'd already assumed that. The paper assumes it cannot be paint, which was an initial thought. So there's two assumptions right at the start of this work which are guiding the subsequent data. Okay. So these are the locations that dust was samples were provided that were given to him in from the call that he made in late 2006. One down here, right in the corner of the complex of WTC. Then this one over by the Manhattan side of the Brooklyn Bridge, and a couple a little bit further away. He explains the provenance on these and where they came from. He swept a handful of dust from the rail on the pedestrian walkway near the end of the bridge. So that is this one here. About 10 minutes after the fall of the North Tower, he then went to visit a friend, Mr. Tom Bredenbach, carrying the dust in his hand, and the two of them discussed the dust and decided to save it in a plastic bag. On the 11th of the 15th, 2007, Bredenbach sent a portion of the dust to Dr. Jones for analysis. He recorded a video of testimony that was collected about 10 minutes after the second tower collapsed. It was therefore definitely not contaminated by steel cutting or clean-up operations at ground zero. This is very important for those people that claim that the iron-rich crenellated spheres are coming from steel cutting. Furthermore, it is not mixed with dust from WTC7, which fell hours later, and that would discount other types of potential explosives that might be considered to have been used in WTC7, for those people that believe that. He saved, so the second person, he saved some dust and on this date sent it to Dr. Jones for analysis. Another sample was collected from an apartment building at 16 Hudson Street by Mr. Jody Intermont about 2 p.m. on 12th of the 9th, 2001. Two small samples of this dust were simultaneously sent to two people. On the morning of 9/11, 2001, Miss Janet McKinley was in her fourth floor apartment at 113 Cedar Street, 1110 Liberty Street in New York City, across the street from the WTC Plaza. As the South Tower collapsed, the flowing cloud of dust and debris caused the windows of her apartment to break inward, and dust filled her apartment. She escaped by quickly wrapping a wet towel around her head and exiting the building. The building was closed for entry for about a week. As soon as Miss McKinley was allowed to re-enter her apartment, she did so and began cleaning up. There was a thick layer of dust on the floor. She collected some of it into a large sealable plastic bag for possible later use in an art piece. Miss McKinley responded to the request in 2006 paper by Dr. Jones by sending him a dust sample in November 2006. Dr. Jones travelled to California to visit Miss McKinley at her new location, and in the company of several witnesses collected a second sample of the WTC dust directly from her large plastic bag where the dust was stored. She has also sent samples directly to Dr. Jeffrey Farrar and Kevin Ryan. Results from their studies form part of this report. Okay, there was another sample, but the guy didn't want to be reported. The red-grey chips are attracted by a magnet which facilitates collection. Note that. The red-grey chips are attracted by a magnet which facilitates collection. Now, he's not saying iron-rich crenellated spheres are attracted by a magnet attached to these red-grey chips. He's just saying the red-grey chips are attracted by a magnet. They are of variable size with major dimensions of roughly 0.2 to 3 millimeters. Thickness vary from roughly 10 to 100 microns for each layer, red and grey. Samples of the WTC dust from these and other collectors have been sent directly from collectors to various scientists. They used a scanning electron microscope. It used secondary electron imaging and backscattered imaging. The SE imaging was to look at the surface topology and the porosity of the red-grey chips, while the BSE imaging was used to distinguish various in average atomic Z numbers. So this is all standard stuff you will know if you have been following my work. Operating conditions for the acquired XEDS spectra were 20 kiloelectron volts. This is good because it gives you all the spectrum lines for the elements observed. In order to more closely observe the characteristics of the red and grey layers and to eliminate the possibility of surface contamination from other dust particles, several red-grey chips from each of the 4 WTC dust samples were fractured. The clean cross-section surfaces were then studied by BSE imaging and XEDS. This is good technique. So basically, you can argue that whatever happened, however it was collected, however it was stored, if you had this red-grey chip and you looked only on the outside, you might find all sorts of contamination. But if you cracked it, which they did, and then you looked at the fracture layer, you're going to see something which is what the materials are made from, rather than any post-event contamination. So, characterization of the red-grey chips. The red-grey chips were found in all of the dust samples collected. So here is a picture of a red-grey chip from the top. Here is the side. There's a little bit of grey maybe coming under there. This is a red-grey chip. You can see a bit of, this is on the side. There's a red, there's a grey, there's a red, there's a grey. There's a bit of grey hanging out from underneath this red. And this red is actually also getting very thin here. You can almost see through to the grey there in those 2 spots. In this case, you can see the edge, and you can see that this is a grey metallic look here. Photomicrographs of the red-grey chips from samples 1 to 4 of the WTC dust involved in the study, shown in A to D respectively. The inset in D shows a chip edge. This here is the chip edge, which reveals the grey layer. Grey. It's grey and also shiny and sparkly and metallic-y. The red-grey chips are mounted on an aluminium pedestal using a carbon conductive tape for viewing in the scanning electron microscope. Okay. And this is quite a nice image here. I've done these kind of images myself. So you've got the color imagery here in the microscope, optical microscope. Here you have the secondary electron detector, which shows you the topology. And you can see also this kind of white area here. This white is because whatever this is made from, a principal element in here charges up, and so it becomes white. And this is the backscatter detector, and so you can see the red is now darker grey in this, and the grey shiny bit is now actually whiter. And this shows that this contains a lot of lighter elements than the grey silver metallic layer underneath, which is looking like this in this one. Okay. Right. Shows by grayscale intensity the difference in average atomic number between red layer, grey layer, and other dust particles. So here we go. All right. Now, it says here, the BSE image shows the red layer darker than the grey layer, indicating that the red layer is composed of material that has a relatively lower average atomic number than the grey layer. It's all correct. All of this is correct. All of it. A higher magnification BSE image of the corner of one of the chips shown in figure 4 allows for closer examination of the difference in grayscale intensity of the two layers and confirms the higher average atomic number of the gray layer. The red material also shows specks and other heterogeneities in marked contrast to the smooth gray layer. Okay, so the smooth gray layer looks like one type of compound. The red layer here is something into which there are white specks and, to a lesser extent, slightly lighter grey flecks. So specks of white and flecks of grey in a darker matrix, and this is all one kind of stuff here. This is very, very important when you are to see the evidence that I will share with you. So the BSE images illustrate that's the backscattered electron images, illustrate the finding that all of the red layers studied contain small bright particles or grains characterized by a high average atomic number. Okay, so this is the actual principle here. So here we are looking at some other images of it, a little bit closer up. You can see the grey metallic layer here. It's very homogeneous. It looks almost like glassy chopped there. And then this layer, the layer on top, in all of these images is a blob of something which is incorporating flat plates of some kind that are grey and whiter little specks. And really they are nanostructures. I mean, some of these grey layers are actually in the micron width, the flakes are, but you can see this is definitely micron. This is 5 micron, so that would be about 2.5 micron across that dimension, 2.5 micron. But they are thin to the tune of nano thin, and the specks are definitely nano thin. Okay. The 4 spectra in figure 6 indicate the grey layers are consistently characterized by high iron and oxygen content, including a smaller amount of carbon. Just to note that carbon is found in most places you go to look for something, and there's plenty of carbon in this material even when you break it. And then secondly, these are flat surfaces, and what sometimes happens in an SEM is that the electron beam will come in, reflect off this surface and come and bounce back from the carbon tape to which he says he is attaching these samples. So the carbon can be like a reflected thing. Okay, so this is the material analysed under several different samples here, and he finds that the so-called grey chips are basically iron and oxygen with a speck of carbon. Iron and oxygen with a speck of carbon, iron and oxygen with a speck of carbon, iron and oxygen with a speck of carbon. Do we get it? They're an iron and oxygen and a speck of carbon. Okay. It's still, the chemical signatures found in the red layers are also quite consistent. We'll look at figure 7, each showing the presence of aluminium, silicon, iron, and oxygen, and a significant carbon peak as well. Okay, so let's have a look at that. So yes, iron, silicon, aluminium, oxygen, carbon. Iron, silicon, aluminium, oxygen, carbon. Iron, silicon, aluminium, oxygen, carbon. There's a few other things in that particular sample, and these could well be from contamination from the gypsum or so on, because you've got calcium in there and sulfur, so calcium sulfate is like gypsum. Iron, silicon, aluminium, carbon and oxygen. Okay, so very, very consistent between those 4 samples. Well done. Now, I don't know if we need to go into the detail here. It's saying we're going to have a look at the EDX maps here. So they've got 4 detailed close-ups of those particular samples, and you can see it's extremely consistent between the 4 samples. Okay, so 1, you have these nano-thick, micron-wide platelets of mid-grey. You have these white cubes, and you have this grey agglomeration. Again, mid-grey plates, nano-thick, and nanoparticles of something white in a grey agglomeration. Mid-grey plates, nano-thick, and nanoparticles of white in a grey agglomeration. And you get the idea, nano-thick, micron-wide plates, white nanoparticles in a grey agglomeration. Okay, so here's a really nice imagery on this one, very, very clear. You can see these white cube-like structures or cuboid-like structures or a rhombic cuboid type structures. They're the white ones. You have these plates here, which are micrometric in their scale other than their the thin dimension, which is nanometric, and then this grey agglomeration. Okay, so that is the material. Okay, now this is what they saw under EDX. This is the overall look here, and then if we look at the various elements, the iron here, the iron is all of the white cube-like structures. The aluminium here is these thin platelets here. That plate, see, those two plates, this plate. Okay, so the principal ones you can see here are this plate and this plate. This might be in shadow down here. This might be going away from the electron gun, which might be coming down here, and so you don't see this because this is all sort of seemingly dark down here. But anyway, this is definitely aluminium. This is definitely aluminium. There's a little bit that's sticking out over here. The oxygen is in the aluminium, but it's also where the iron is. But this particular aluminium piece looks like it's covered up a little bit by whatever this grey stuff is. This kind of agglomeration, this gloopy stuff that seems to be everywhere. Okay? And that is interesting to note because when you come and look at the silicon also seems to be over where this aluminium is, where this is grey. And it seems to be over here. There's also silicon here where there's iron, but it also seems to be an iron bit underneath some grey blob. This will become very, very important soon. Okay, the last one is oxygen is pretty much everywhere. And by looking at the fact that oxygen is dark here and dark down here, it probably does mean that this area is in shadow. So any aluminium in this place and down here will not be seen. Okay. And these are other methods for looking at it. And again, you're seeing the potassium and sodium here. They could be from other contamination. Okay, so the consistent elements are, here you go. He's actually saying it here. The large calcium and sulfur peaks may be due to contamination with gypsum from the pulverized wallboard material in the buildings. I agree. I fully agree with that. The resulting spectrum shown in figure 4 produced the expected peaks for iron, silicon, aluminium, oxygen, and carbon. Well, I don't think we need to look at anything else for the moment. This was some attempt where they used a blowtorch and they heated up the material and they got little spheres. And of course, when you melt anything that has metal in it, you're going to get little spheres. That is a little sphere. That little sphere is not an iron-rich crenellated sphere. It's just a sphere. And here we go. There's the lighting. And here's an agglomeration. And here's something that looks a little bit spherical. But it, to me, when I look at the SEM, it just looks like a bit of molten metal. It's not really a sphere in the truest sense. And here, this is during ignition of commercial thermite. Well, yes, you get spheres, and spheres are something you get in thermite. This is during the ignition of the red-grey chip. They're just spheres. This is actually different. When you look at this under SEM, the spheres from the actual WTC dust are very, very spherical, and they have a crenellation. But this image here does not show it, unfortunately, which is annoying. But the actual spheres in the other study from the dust, not by these parties, actually shows the crenellations. But the crenellations are there, it's just not very clear in this image. I don't see crenellations here, I just see a blob, and these are just blobs of metal from thermite. Okay, and this is definitely not what I would call a sphere, this is what I would call just a blob of melted metal. Anyway, I'm not going to be focusing on the sphere, I am going to be focusing on the chips. We deal with the chips, the thermite theory is gone, we're going to deal with the chips. Right. Here we go. Are you ready for this? Let me just see where I'm going with this. Right. Before I went and presented at Tesla Tech, my route, which was most affordable to get there, was to go via New York. And I thought I would take the opportunity to do that for the first time in over a quarter century and visit the 9/11 Memorial Museum, which I did. I've already posted something on that. You can go and look at that on my blog. I recommend you do. But I also observed several other things when I was there. And what I'm about to show you inspired me in total absence of ever really reading any of Stephen E. Jones' work, including that of the so-called active thermitic material and his original 1987 cold nuclear fusion, or his one on cold fusion in 1989. I hadn't really read any of those, I'm sad to say, but I kind of like clean rooming things. I kind of like clean rooming things. And so effectively, I didn't have any preconceptions in my mind. I just went into the museum and just observed. And before I get there, I want to show you something. This here, not this, but this. This is my pestle and mortar. This pestle and mortar has served me well for decades to grind up my herbs and spices. And here it is with a little bit of washing damage. That is to say, I've washed it out after I've done some grinding of herbs and spices. And a bit of water is left in there and it's caused a little bit of rust to occur. This actual pestle and mortar was used very recently by the 87-year-old Roy Shinamaza when I was in Japan earlier in the year, and I will share that data when I asked him to do a analog of the Yule-Brown radiation remediation test. That's going to be a very exciting piece of work I will be able to show you in the near future. Okay, anyway, so this is what cast iron, that is carbon steel, looks like. It's black, and if it gets rusty, it gets a little bit red and a little bit yellow. Okay, these are different oxides of iron. Okay, this is an oxyacetylene cut foundation in situ in the 911 Memorial Museum. And you can see the cut lines of the oxyacetylene torch at the concrete base area here. And you can also see there are similar colors to not only the black, but also the reds and yellows here of the rust. Okay, predominantly this kind of reddy tinge, orangey tinge and yellowy tinge here, but we have the same kind of black carbon steel going on there. Here is the absolutely massive foundation plates. Absolutely massive foundation plates. And you can see the pads they were on. And you can see, again, we have the dark black of the bare iron. And we have a range of selections of rust and potentially some concrete after sort of marks here. It looks like they've been chipping away and getting rid of the concrete here, and the concrete was clearly all around this. It's under it, it's in this crack, and so one might imagine that this deposit here is concrete or something else. Okay. Now, something everyone will be probably thinking right now is the subject of twisted steel. And this is clearly from the upper part of the building because it's not very thick. Or it's a part that wasn't supporting the rest of the structure above. Okay? Not supporting the structure above. Now, just over the road from where I am sat now, I saw a steel-framed 4-story building torn down by an excavator. And the pile of steel looked exactly like this. There was no planes, there was no nukes, there was no Nano-Thermite, there was nothing like that going on, and it looked like this. That's just the reality. It just looked like this. Okay? So for all of those that say that this is a sign of something fantastical going on, it's not. This is what it looks like when you tear up a building that has a steel frame. Okay? Now, that being said, in the central part of the museum, there is an area which is extremely dimly lit, in which you are not allowed under any circumstances to take some photos. And the very, very last object that you see as you're about to walk out of this part of the you can't take any photos in this extremely dimly lit place is a very, very, very thick box frame piece of steel. I mean, it's like 2 inches thick or something like that, of the order, really thick, each part of the box. And that is smoothly bent. It is smoothly bent in multiple axes without any cracking of the welds or cracking of the metal. It's literally like the whole thing became like a wet noodle and bent. It's just bent like a noodle, without cracking, without fracturing. I recommend, if for nothing else, that you go and see that particular beam in the part you can't take any photos of. That being said, I did think I would ponder this particular part here a little longer, and so I did. And I took a video here, which I will show you. There we go. And when I looked at that, I thought to myself, it's red! It's red! It's red! Look at it! It's red! It's red, it's red, that's red. It's red. And then I had a flashback. I was in 32 Offington Gardens. I was about 8 years old. It was 1980. 1980. We had a farm back then, 20 acres. My dad had some old diggers, some old tractors, a dozer. We were forever fixing things that were made of iron, that worked outside and lived outside. Be that a fence, be that a piece of machinery, be that whatever. We had a lot of things. And my dad would give me this job, which I rather liked. I rather liked it. He said, son, I want you to clean the rust off this with this wire brush. Typically, it was a steel or often brass brush. And I would go, and I would do this for hours and hours and hours, and I'd be fully entertained. No, I didn't have a Switch 2. I didn't have an Xbox. I had a piece of metal that was rusty and a wire brush. That was my entertainment, and I loved it. It was therapeutic, and it was also quite physically demanding if the sample was large. And then he said, son, I would like you to paint this with red lead. And I'm at school and they're telling me that lead's not good for children. But anyway, I shall paint it. Red lead. Why was it called red lead? Dunno. Let's have a look, shall we? So, here we go. Red lead anti-corrosion paint. I'm looking at this object in front of me and I'm noticing that there are all kinds of scrapes and scuffs on it. Yeah, there's a big tear. That's the kind of thing you might notice first. But there's all kinds of little things on there. Now, what do we see? A typical primer paint layer is about 25 to 50 microns thick. Well, typical. Well, this might be the typical area, and some of these areas might be thinner, but this bit here looks clearly thicker to me. Clearly to thicker, and this bit here looks like it's been scraped off. Certainly these look like being scraped off. Some areas are grey. Yeah, there's this area here which is grey. What's that all about? Definitely looks grey. I mean, it's grey in here and it's blending into red. It's grey blending into red. This bit is chipped off. There's literally a boundary between an area where there doesn't look to be like much paint and then there is paint and then it gets thicker over here. Here, some of the areas are barely covered. I mean, this is very thin. Is this scraped off? I don't know. Could it be scraped off or dropped off when the metal beams interacted with each other or buckled? I don't know. But I'm thinking to myself, it is a way to protect steel. I know this for a fact. I did it as a kid. I know this for a fact. But were they really using lead? My dad, when I was growing up, he had vats of things like DDT and other stuff lying around the farm because the farm had moved stuff from farms from before the war. You know, we had stuff lying around, okay? We did. And so he might have had a lot of red lead paint and it was good at doing the job that it was designed for. Or maybe it was only called red lead paint because that's what it used to be. So I did a bit of investigation. Red lead anti-corrosion paint. Voluntary reductions for and regulations of red lead paint, that's PB304, based primers began in the mid-20th century, accelerating in the 1970s to 1990s, as safer alternatives like zinc phosphate and red iron oxide Fe2O3 pigments based primers were used. Fe2O3 pigment-based primers were used. The overall World Trade Center complex groundbreaking was on August the 5th, 1966. The site was dedicated, as you can see by this photo of the dedication installation, on April the 4th, 1973. If voluntary reductions and regulations came by the mid-20th century and accelerated in the 1970s to 1990s, one would have thought that they may not be using red lead, but it might just be still what you call it. Okay. So what else did I see? Well, on the previous image that I showed you of the foundations, I noticed this little thing down here. And on this you see our red area, our grey area, even some bare iron up here, some bare iron with some grey, with maybe a little bit of rust in here. And then here we have a paint layer peeling off. We literally have a piece of paint peeling off and another piece of paint here peeling off. Literally peeling off. And it's grey underneath. Okay, so what does red primer look like? Red primer is used on iron and steel for protection against rust and corrosion, thanks to its red iron oxide Fe2O3 pigment, which provides a strong, non-porous barrier against moisture and humidity. And here, from this site, you can see down here, and I will give all of the sources in the PDFs, which you can link to at your heart's content. iron oxide, Fe2O3. That is the red pigment used against rust and corrosion in primers, red primers. So let's have a look at what was in the paper. We have a red layer and a grey layer, a red layer and a grey layer. In one instance, he showed a red layer, grey layer, and then a red layer. And in fact, this looks like there might be something like a red layer underneath it. But this is the red layer and this is the grey layer. So let's just stick to that. Yeah? Okay, so here's a little bit of summary of some of the research, and then I will delve into the specifics. Anti-corrosion paint formulations incorporating aluminium, often as pigments, flakes or paste, were used in the 1960s as well as buildings from earlier in the 20th century. Aluminium pigmented paints for corrosion protection emerged in the early 1900s, with ready mixed versions patented in 1921, and they became a standard for protecting steel structures. So aluminium pigmented anti-corrosion paints became a standard for protecting steel structures from the early 1900s, early 20th century rather, from 1921 at least. Like bridges, tanks, pipelines and industrial plants, due to their ability to form protective oxide layers and reflect heat UV. By the 1920s, armour paints, a historical type of anti-corrosion coating, commonly featured aluminium pigments in top coats applied over primers like red lead. Now, aluminium pigments would be the top coat. However, the primer would be red lead in the early in the 1920s, but red lead was replaced from the 1950s. Can you see where we're going now? And these systems were widely used through the 1960s for ferrous heritage and infrastructure. These formulations often combined aluminium with iron oxide pigments. Bare aluminium, not aluminium oxide. It combined aluminium with iron oxide pigments. Aluminium and iron oxide. Aluminium and iron oxide. What is that, my friends? To those people that are looking for a fire to be started by some other means, well, aluminium and iron oxide pigments would, my friends, if it was very small, be considered as Nano-Thermite. But it's not. It's aluminium with iron oxide pigments. E.g., micaceous. I'd never heard this term before, but I did know that mica is thin because we use mica in the Celani cells. We have mica windows on our Geiger-Müller tubes. So mica is something I'm familiar with. So micaceous, I'm already thinking of these like flat platelets. Micaceous iron oxide. A form of hematite similar to red oxide for enhanced durability, elasticity, and barrier effects against moisture and corrosion. Now here's the thing about micaceous iron oxide. Above minus 23 degrees centigrade, which I would argue it was above minus 23 degrees centigrade in the labs in which these samples were studied, micaceous iron oxide, MiO, is weakly ferromagnetic. That means it can be picked up by a magnet. And that is how the red chips were collected in the study that we are discussing. Micaceous iron oxide is often separated using magnetic methods during processing. It's literally the way they separate it. It's literally the way they separate it. So, one of the areas in the world that is a major producer of micaceous iron oxide is neighbouring to here. It's Austria. And here is one of Austria's producers. This is MiOxR, micaceous iron oxide. Micaceous iron oxides, MiO, are rather scarce and significant natural resources, are known to be available in Europe, Austria, Asia, China, Australia and Africa. There are differences in mineralogy and iron content. The most important quality criteria of MiO products according to this. The content of lamellar particles. So they are platelet particles, minimum 65%. So you have to have mostly at least 65% of like lamellar particles for it to meet the grade for the material. And it has to have an iron content, a minimum of 85%, and the color of the product should be grey with a metallic sheen. Grey with metallic sheen. Grey with metallic sheen. So what do we have? We have magnetic methods are used to separate the actual material. And then here, grey with metallic sheen. And this is an actual SEM. And this is actually the size of the grey layers in the so-called Nano-Thermite. It's actually the same size. These are some other suppliers. You can go and look at their websites. We will look at this guy's website, this company's website. And you've got a scale down here, 10 microns. So these are of the thickness. These are of the thickness. Now I'm going to go and have a look at the website there of this particular company because it has some other details which are pertinent to showing that the materials could be this. Okay. So this is what it looks like in the hand of a certain size. There are several different grades that they produce. So they can be, you know, various thicknesses, various scales. Okay. So depending on what one you buy, this company produces very specific grades of them. That is to say, that have an upper and lower limit in size. You know, you've got a uppercut 125 microns here, or an uppercut of 400 microns here, and lower cut of 200 microns here. So you've got different specifications here, and very fine. The micro is 1050, and the Miox ME63125 is very large platelets, but they need to be a certain thinness to qualify, and they need to have this minimum 85% iron Fe2O3 content. But there we go. Thank you very much, Black Tie, for that donation. Much appreciated. Okay, so you can go and look at these sources in your own time, but essentially, if we go back to our presentation here, you can see in these cheaper sources from China and India, you get a whole different range of different sizes, from small flex to very large flex. So the question is where they're coming from. Are they coming from a Austrian company that's producing very tight thicknesses and very tight ranges of sizes of the flex, or is it coming from a cheaper supplier? I don't know, whatever. So the grey chips. The grey chips are micaceous iron oxide, MiO. These are used in anti-corrosion paints. They are weakly ferromagnetic, allowing them and material bonded to them to be recovered with a magnet as observed in this study. They are commercially produced in the thickness observed and in the range of other flake dimensions in the study. Being iron oxide, they would react with aluminium if ignited. Okay, so if you had pure iron in there, they would react. Okay, they are grey with a metallic sheen, matching the optical microscopy in the paper. Okay, so the grey chips, in my opinion, are absolutely done. They are used in anti-corrosion paints in the form as observed in the study. Done. Forget it. It's not a thing that was deliberately put in for thermite. Okay, next, the red layer. The chemical signatures, as we read in the paper, found in the red layers are also quite consistent, each showing the presence of aluminium, here, aluminium, in these nano-thickness platelet-sized pieces. Silicon here, and the silicon is here, and this is over an iron area, and this is over an aluminium area, but it's also where you have this grey stuff also covering those two bits. Iron here is all of these small white sections, and oxygen. Oxygen's pretty much everywhere, and a significant carbon. Carbon is pretty much everywhere. Okay, here it comes. While not every red oxide primer from the era included aluminium, hybrid formulations blending metallic aluminium with oxide-based pigments for rust inhibition were established by the 1960s, particularly as alternatives to lead-heavy paints gained traction. Particularly as alternatives to lead-heavy paints gained traction. So, what do you think, pray, does the aluminium form look like that is used as the material that is inserted into anti-corrosion paints? Anyone guess? It looks like this. Aluminium paste flakes look like this. They're pure aluminium, little pasty flakes. Okay? They are large and they have thin cross-section. They're large plates with a thin cross-section. Some people call them leafing aluminium paste, and this is from a paper called Polypyrrole Aluminium Flake Pigmented Coatings for Corrosion Inhibition. Okay? So, let's go and have a look at that particular paper. Here's some of the other websites just to show you I'm not making it up. This is the micaceous one here. This is this one here. There we go. There we go. That's that one. So here you can go and have a look at this metallic pigment. This is the metallic pigment. And we will find the paper which is in my... here, I think. No, it's not. No, it's not. Oh dear, what do I do with it? Okay, I need to find that. Give me just a second, please. Okay, here we go. That's the one I deleted. This paper is done by the Department of Defense, which doesn't exist anymore. You don't do any defense apparently in America now. It's all war. Department of War, United States of America. In 2007, Corrosion Conference, Army, Navy, Air Force, Marines, Coast Guard. And it is aluminium flake pigmented coatings for corrosion inhibition. And blah, blah, blah. You can go and read it in your own time. Here are the aluminium flakes in question. 10 microns. Yes, they are the size as observed in the paper. They are of the size as observed in the paper, both in X and Y and Z dimensions. Okay? And these are used in anti-corrosion paints as talked about by the Department of Defense, Department of War. Okay? So, that is our aluminium flakes. Our paste, as is known for many, many, many decades to be used in anti-corrosion paints. Now, what about those little crystals of iron oxide? Could they be deliberately manufactured for some evil scheme, or were they in fact just red iron oxide form? Well, this is from a paper in Nature. Yep, it's a paper in Nature. We're going to go and have a look at that. But here is one form. And here is another form. And these are in the... the scale down here is 100 nanometers. And so this is exactly equivalent to what is observed in the paper. 100% equivalent to that observed in the paper. Done. Okay, I'm going to dig up the Nature paper here so we can just confirm that. Let me see if I can get it from there. Is it going to allow me to do that? No. So yes, this, my friends, is in Nature Scientific Reports, and we go to the article, and it says the synthesis of shaped iron oxide nanoparticles, effect of iron precursor salts on the shapes of iron oxides. Okay, so there it is. It's a real paper. I'm not making it up. This is the same size as the particles observed in the paper under discussion. Okay. Right. There's also a patent here, a more recent patent actually, in 2016 from China, 2016. The invention discloses iron oxide red anti-rust paint for metal. The paint is prepared from dimethylbenzene, iron oxide red, chlorinated rubber, cobalt naphthenate, aluminium stearate, diacetone alcohol, aluminium paste, and titanium dioxide, and zinc phosphate, and zinc chrome. Okay, so what have we got? We have iron oxide red, aluminium paste. Okay, iron oxide red, aluminium paste. Iron oxide red literally is those square chunky particles as observed in the paper under discussion. Aluminium paste is literally the flat platelets of aluminium. This is a iron oxide red anti-rust paint for metal patent. There we go. You could probably look at his list of patents down here and find very, very, very similar things. You might even find the sort of exact thing that we're discussing. Okay. So, we have a problem though. We have a problem because in this material there is silicon which is not in the aluminium, and we have silicon which is not in the iron oxide. But we do have this stuff that seems to be everywhere. So since it seems to be everywhere, if we are saying this is a paint, might it not be a binder? So I thought probably it's the binder. It would be Occam's razor, the most logical thing for it to be. So, what is a typical binder used in paints that are used for anti-corrosion? Siloxane. Siloxane binder. And do you know what it contains? It contains silicon, carbon, oxygen. Under an SEM, you do not see hydrogen. Silicon, carbon, and oxygen. Well, you do not see hydrogen. Okay? So, the red layer is aluminium flakes in the form detected are standard aluminium paste material added to anti-corrosion paints. That is these bits here. Iron oxide particles in the form detected are a standard component in anti-corrosion paints. That is these parts here. Siloxane is a standard binder in anti-corrosion paints which contains hydrogen, carbon, silicon, and oxygen. That accounts for every aspect of the observed elements in the places, in the form that they are in the paint. And as I said before, they combined micaceous iron oxide with a binder containing, aluminium paste containing iron oxide, the binder being siloxane in this case, to provide the observed anti-corrosion paint, as per standard forms of anti-corrosion paint available at the time when they were building the building. So the conclusion here is that all elements and their forms and structures in the red grey chips have been found to be standard in anti-corrosive paints. Jones et al. I can't even spell on my last slide. That'd teach me. Jones et al. Were wrong. There was no nanothermite evidence in the World Trade Center dust samples. Teach me. Okay, so there we go. I am going to show a couple of videos of these kind of things in situ. Right. So where are they? Somewhere here. Just to show you, these are the rest of the things. We got the iron oxide here. You can go and look it up yourself. This is the paper you'll be able to go to. This is the leafing aluminium. This is the nature study. These are the components of anti-corrosion coatings, solvents, binders. Now, one other person did suggest binding using epoxy. It is not epoxy in this case. It is, I found this out just after I thought to myself, someone must have come up with this. Not just mentioned. Thank you very much, Phil Dubois. That is fantastic. Really, really appreciated. Really, really appreciated. So basically, siloxane was not mentioned by this other party. Their hypothesis, which I'll show you the paper in 2012, which I found after I did this initial 4 hours of work to work this out. They suggested using epoxy, but it's not epoxy. But they were on the right line to say that it was a binder. So siloxane is the particular material being used, and you will be able to see this, and that is that. This is the China patent. Right, so this is red oxide that is being sorry, I'm not showing you any of that, am I? Oh, I'm going to go back to the page here, sorry. Okay, so this is what I was wheeling through. This is a link that I will give you. It's on the slides. Components of anti-corrosion coating, solvents, binders, and the binder that was suggested by another party, which I found out yesterday, actually had made a similar suggestion, he suggested it was epoxies, but it's not epoxy, it's siloxane. There you go, siloxane. So that provides the silicon, carbon, and oxygen that are in the binder areas. This is a patent that I discussed. And so here is red oxide. Now this is at a merchant's yard, ready for you to buy and start producing your building or structure. Okay. So I would imagine that it came from the foundry all ready to not rust on site before it was assembled, and it would already be coated as it is in this large production warehouse. There we go. That's as it is, coated with your red paint. Here is some people that are applying it to steel reinforcing. So there's the uncoated materials. Okay. And you don't want that going into your building because it'll get moisture coming through the concrete and it'll end up by causing rust. Rust is 10 times larger than iron. It'll cause the concrete to expand. So the right way to do it is to go around and paint it on, or do what this guy is doing, and that is to spray it on. Okay? So, and then this one over here, is someone doing what I did as a child, which is to paint it on after the fact. And he's just got a pot of red oxide primer painting material there, and he's slapping it on. And that was me as a kid. That was me as a kid. I loved finding this because it just reminded me of being a little boy trying to make my dad happy. So there we go. Okay, so that was that. That is your various examples of in the warehouse and after market applications. Okay. So just to close out the concepts here, there was this paper published in. I thought to myself, I can't be the only one to think of this. I just can't be. Yes, it's mentioned in the paper itself that it was completely dismissed, but I cannot imagine that I was the only person to think of this. And this one here, published in August 2012. Like I say, I found this only this week. I actually did this investigation many weeks ago, but I just hadn't had time to get it out to you guys. But here's the paper, and I'm going to go and look at it now. and it's here. You will have the link to this. And essentially, this is suggesting it's an anti-corrosion paint, but it says it's iron oxide and kaolin clay. It's not correct, and I think you'll find out that it says there was a, if I search for it, maybe here, it's got paint in there twice, paint, and he says it's epoxy here. So he was wrong on the kaolin and he was wrong on the epoxy, but anyway, that's that. He also says that you can get spheres from melting metal flying through the air, and that is exactly true. You can. That's what you get when you make lead shot. I once visited my co-director down in south central France, and there he showed me this lead shot tower. It's this huge tower, and at the top they had a molten bucket of lead, and the lead would drip through a hole very quickly and it would fall down this tower, and as it fell down it formed a sphere and hit the bottom and it produced lead shot. Thank you very much, Laszlo. It would be interesting to see whether silicon is still to be found in the painting on the columns after the fact. Should be due to cluster decay. No, silicon should be there because it's in the siloxane. The silicon should be there because it's in the siloxane. I think that this data that I've shared with you today conclusively ends the Nano-Thermite deliberate act for 9/11. Yes, there are materials that if you try and light them off a piece of metal, and you really go and try and light it hard, you might get it to fizzle a little bit and produce some blobby things that at the right angle might look like spheres. That is not to say that they're producing the same spheres as Nano-Thermite, and it's not to say that they're producing the same spheres as observed in the actual dust from 9/11. There's different type of spheres. Okay? I'm only in this presentation removing any shadow of a doubt that Nano-Thermite was a deliberate thing in the buildings and was the means by which the buildings were taken down. The Nano-Thermite is just a desire to find, probably a well-intentioned desire by the parties involved to find an understanding of how the impossible thing that they saw happen, this nearly freefall demolition of the buildings and dustification of the buildings, how that might have happened in a way that they did not find the government theory adequate to explain. And so it was a noble effort for the same reasons that anyone should pursue proper understanding of what went on. Unfortunately, the actual SEMs categorically show, without a shadow of a doubt, standard anti-corrosion paints used at the time with the same exact nanostructures and forms of metals and oxides of metals and binders that were used at the time. Not a thing. Nano-Thermite is dead. Okay. So, just to quickly go over, and then I will take any questions. This was ending the Nano-Thermite 911 hypothesis for the World Trade Center catastrophe. My name is Bob Greenyer, and I'm a volunteer with the Martin Fleischmann Memorial Project. 5th of October 2025. Cast iron, mild steel, carbon steel, looks like this. It's got black, and sometimes when it gets wet and is exposed to the air, it gets a little bit of red and yellow kind of rusty bits on it. This is actually a oxyacetylene cut foundation beam from the Twin Towers, and it has black, typical iron, carbon steel look to it with typical rust marks in places. These are the foundation plates, which look like typical iron with rust and possibly concrete-based deposits on their surface. This is an upper beam or a thin outer non-structural beam of the Twin Towers. It is buckled, as you see, in standard demolition sites that I have physically witnessed happening in slow motion, comparatively, on a 4-story building across the road from where I am sat now. It looked pretty much identical to this. there was no special stuff going on. Here is an image which was my attempt to do some further study of this. Laszlo, there's iron in the binder, and it might get destroyed a bit, but there's iron in the steel. Okay, so red lead anti-corrosion paint. There is definitely something red on here, which is a layer. It is variously thick. Normal primer layers are 25 to 50 micron. I would argue all of that, or even thicker, is going on. There's an area which is cut off here. There's a definite step there. There's a thicker bit here. This might not have been always applied via spraying. It might have been applied by dipping. It might have been applied by brush or touched up with a brush. So you can imagine there would be various thicknesses. Some areas are grey. Images show that there are areas that are even barely covered. And clearly this looks like it's been scraped, in my view, possibly by things crashing against each other. And it could have come off even by buckling and fracturing. Here, the anti-corrosion paint was established, and red lead went out of fashion by the mid-20th century, well before the start of the construction, which was in 1966, and well before the completion on April 4th, as shown in here in the actual commissioning of the building on April 4th, 1973. Looking more closely at this image, we can literally see red, grey, iron, rust, and then here we can actually see flaking off what I would argue is paint in a layer here, and even on this side. Okay. It's used, red primer is used on iron and steel for protection against rust and corrosion, thanks to its red iron oxide. Here we go, Fe2O3. You can imagine if you mix this red oxide in a binder with a pigment which is based on aluminium, it would end up being not quite as red as this. So you would end up with this color. And also note that they've got a whole load of different types of lights. None of them are very favorable to photography in the 9/11 museum. So it's a bit difficult to get the color accuracy. But anyway, to the eye you could see that it was reddish. So here is the main image, or one of the main images showing the grey and red layer from the paper by Jones et al. I go over the details here. That aluminium pigmented paints for corrosion protection were emerged in the 1900s. They were patents in 1921, and they became standard for protecting steel structures. They contained pigments, flakes and pastes of elemental aluminium. And later, as I said before, when lead oxide became unfavorable, they replaced it with red iron oxides, and you got combined aluminium elemental metal with iron oxide pigments, and especially in the form of micaceous iron oxide for these types of anti-corrosion. So red iron oxide in the form, micaceous iron oxide in the form of these platelets over -23 degrees C can be magnetically separated, as will the things attached to it. It looks shiny and grey as observed in the optical spectrums, and it is the same form in the SEM imagery, grey with metallic sheen. Depending on whether you go for these kind of suppliers where you get specific sizes, or you go for a generic supplier where you get very small bits up to very large bits, will depend on your large dimensions. Your thin dimensions are as observed. So micaceous iron oxides are used in anti-corrosion paints. They are weakly ferromagnetic, explaining the magnetic recovery. They're commercially produced in the thicknesses observed and the range of other flake dimensions. Because they're iron oxide, they would react if aluminium were ignited, as observed in the paper. They are grey with a metallic sheen, as observed. The the bound material is aluminium flakes called paste, standard since the early part of the 1900s, and red iron oxide, standard since the removal and banning of lead oxide. The binder is siloxane, and that accounts for the silicon and carbon observed in the overall matrix. So, aluminium flakes in the forms detected are standard aluminium paste material added to anti-corrosion paints. Iron oxide particles in the form detected are standard component in anti-corrosion paints. Siloxane is a standard binder in anti-corrosion paints, which contains hydrogen, carbon, silicon, and oxygen. All elements and their forms and structures in the red-grey chips have been found to be standard in anti-corrosive paints. Jones et al. Were wrong. There is no nanothermite evidence in the World Trade Center dust samples. All references are in here. You can go and verify everything that I'm saying, and I will take your questions now. Okay. So I'm going to only answer questions that are specifically about what I've discussed tonight, which is Jones' previous work on what he called cold fusion, which turns out looks likely to be one of them. I agree with him that it could have caused the transmutation of elements in the Earth. And I think it is a quasi-particle, and that quasi-particle, which he did not define, which allows atoms to come together and fuse, is, in fact, the exotic vacuum object, the NG soliton. He left that open, and I've just ticked that box for him. Thank you, Stephen E. Jones. I think you were quite on the money there. It's a shame that you didn't consider those ideas later in your evaluation of various things. But in the case of your desire to do what a lot of us wanted and find out what was the cause for the buildings to behave in the way they did in that catastrophic disaster, I think that setting yourself a goal to find something that did fiery explosive destruction in the ash before you even received a sample of an ash was probably not the right approach to take. But you found what you did, and at a push you can get it to maybe interact maybe a little bit and produce a blobby thing like you observed, but it doesn't produce the iron-rich crenellated spheres I think we know and love in their own way for the magic that they are showing us all. And I think that you need to let this one go. Stephen, you need to let this one go. And ideally, let it go in a public fanfare and an announcement to say, I have been shown that standard materials are what I observed in all of these ash samples. Those standard materials are the standard elements and forms of those elements, and the binder that is in ordinary anti-corrosive paints. I made a mistake, and I'm sorry. I genuinely thought I was helping. But we need to move on for this, and this is not a theory that could even get close to explaining what happened to the towers. We need to discount this theory. So we're back to the government theory and the other two theories. One of them is probably, I would say, a lot easier to deal with than this one. And there's one other theory that no one can discuss. Thank you very much, Gary Johnson. It's very kind of you. Okay, so I'm going to see if you've got any questions. With regards to this paper he co-authored, has been debunked by many people in the past. Do you know about Dennis Rancourt's discussion of 20s? No, I don't know. No, like I say, I am a 9/11 revisionist. I clean roomed this. I went in not having given it any thought to the 9/11 museum. I saw things painted with red. I thought back to my childhood days about protecting iron at the behest of my father and to support the farm. And I thought, well, maybe it was that. And I looked into what paints contained around those times. I spent about 4 or 5 hours doing that. I found that exactly the things in the paper were the things that he had observed. I didn't actually find out until an hour before, because I'd skipped over it. I was just looking at the SEM images. I didn't even find out until I was doing the highlighting a few hours before I started this presentation that they had initially thought it might be paint. I didn't even find that in this paper. So I'm sure other people have thought of it, but what I hope I've given today is a complete and precise explanation for what was observed in the paper and attributed to some kind of nefarious nano-thermite thing that was put into the buildings. It wasn't. It was just a paint. I misunderstood. You might want to see this. Very good, bomb-proof. Right, so Bob, can you just please mention the theory that can't be mentioned? The theory that can't be mentioned is that of something that would explain all of the actual observations of what happened on 9/11, which were encoded and documented in the book by Dr. Judy Wood called Where Did the Towers Go? It's just a book of facts of the events which do not add up. And the theory is that some technology was applied to the buildings that made the facts that she documented in that book. But it's the fact that her name cannot be mentioned and that evidence cannot be promoted is in itself an interesting social phenomenon. Okay, like I say, I'm not going to answer questions that are not related to what I'm talking about today, which is the grey chips or the historical good work, it would appear, of Stephen E. Jones. Civilian Space Agency is asking, may I ask you to answer why you cherry-picked the photos and didn't show pics of the melted beams and data sent from the actual experts who refute your statements? What? I don't know who refutes my statements, so I don't know what that is about. I cherry-picked? Just go and look at micaceous iron oxide. It all looks like that. All of it. Pick one. Pick any of them. They all look like it. Go and look at the forms of iron oxide, which are iron oxide. So it just is that shape, and it is nanostructures. That is what it is, right? You can go and look at it, right? Go and look at binders used for anti-corrosive paints, and you'll find that siloxane is it. You know, and if you're trying to find something that's everywhere where the carbon is and everywhere where the silicon is, which has got silicon and carbon in it, and also there's oxygen everywhere, well, siloxane is that, and it's a binder in anti-corrosion paints. There we go. Right, you can pick any siloxane, and all siloxane is the same. It's going to have silicon, carbon, and oxygen. Sorry, my laptop's trying to install. I don't want, no, what? Hold on. My laptop is trying to install Windows 11. Stop it. Civilian Space Agency, if you put the website up, it won't appear unless you're a moderator. So basically, you cherry pick your image, Civilian Space Agency, your image that you want to choose of micaceous iron oxide. Choose any of them because it all looks like that, right? And it has to look like that to meet the standards, of what you would put in an anti-corrosion paint. Then choose your image of the cubic form of iron oxide nanoparticles, and it will look like that. You choose your image, and then you compare it to what is in the paper that's being discussed. You choose your image of a siloxane-based anti-corrosive paint primer. When you look at that under the SEM, it's going to look a bit gloopy, binding all of the material in the anti-corrosive paint together. You choose it. You cherry pick your image. You do as much research as you want to do to find the image that suits you, right? And then you go and look at aluminium paste, known to be used in anti-corrosive paints as actual aluminium flakes since the early 1900s, right? You choose your image. Don't take my image for it, for gospel. You choose your image. And then you line those images up, which are your choices. You cherry pick those images and you compare them to the things in the paper. And do you know what you're going to find? You're going to find the same thing that I did. So, would the plus 2,000 degrees Fahrenheit temperatures that were reported to persist in the rubble for over the months be explained by jet fuel? No, that's not the question for today. I think... Bob, please, I have asked in other streams but never can find out what the toroidal moment is. I've done lots of presentations in the toroidal moment. All of the maths and all of the specifics of the toroidal moment are done in papers that you can go and find by Afanasyev and Dubovik, and principally by Dubovik. Many, many papers with all of the maths. You choose them. That's great. Knock yourself out. Science isn't a committee process. That's what happened to destroy Pons and Fleischmann. When Stephen E. Jones put up his hand, basically saying, is this pseudoscience, right? And encouraging the other members of the panel to write them off, right? It is not a committee thing. Micaceous iron oxide is not going to change its form because thousands of people said that Nano-Thermite exists. The iron oxide form is not going to change its form because lots of opinions have been written on lots of podcasts. It's not going to change its form. Siloxane as a binder in anti-corrosion paints is not going to change how it gloops material together just because someone's got a really good opinion about things. It's not going to do that. You know, the aluminium paste is not going to change its form. It's just not. And you can't rewrite history of anti-corrosion paints just because it's convenient. Before a single sample was even known to exist, it was decided that something was more energetically taking down those buildings and that must have been some sort of explosion in there. There was a pre-decision about what was to be found. It's written in the paper that that is the case. They also pre-decided that it wasn't paint, right? So automatically they weren't going to consider all of the things that are known to exist in paint that would have produced flakes. Specifically, that would have produced flakes of this bound aluminium paste, iron oxide, red oxide, and the siloxane on top of magnetically recoverable pieces of micaceous iron oxide. John, thank you very much. Thank you very much for your £10. That's really appreciated. The peer review on that paper was abominable. It was criticised as a journal that was a bit lax at the time. I think someone had to resign over it. Maybe some people had to resign over it about allowing that paper. It's dead. It's dead. Nano-Thermite theory of 9/11 is dead. It does not exist anymore. People need to deal with that. When you're talking about peer review, I would argue that I am a peer reviewer of that paper. That is to say, I've studied SEMs for about 10 years now, specifically in energetic conditions, right? I've been looking at layers of stuff for years. That makes me a peer, not a commentator, a peer. A peer looking at it and recognizing standard things in standard paints. Specifically, that was dismissed by the authors in their opening paragraphs. Specifically, they said they were looking for some type of explosive. Some type of thing that was more, would account for it than jet fuel. It's done. Okay, I'm going to quickly look to see if there's any specific questions. If not, I will call it a night. If anyone wants to ask specific questions on the subjects at hand in the subject of the blog only, otherwise it'll be forever. 1. Stephen E. Jones did some good work at the beginning, muon catalyzed fusion. Then he realized something must be going on in the Earth. 2, and I think he was right about that there was some quasi-particle that was doing this type of what he called cold nuclear fusion. I think he was right about that. I don't think it's how he puts it across. I don't think the mechanism works as it was shown in his 1987 paper in Scientific American. And so that is as it may. I account for his neutrons in his 1989 paper as a different pathway potentially, although there's some question about the energy levels, but certainly the energy spectrum is able to achieve what was observed, just not necessarily in a standard system the actual peaks in the places that they were observed. But that being said, I think he was further ahead than people realize actually in what was going on. And I think that is probably recognized by the sheer massive volume of citations of that 1989 paper. It's just huge how many times that's been cited, really, in publishing terms. But in terms of reading terms, the amount of people that have dedicated I hate people wasting life. I hate people wasting life. Right? So if I can share something that stops people using a few brain minutes on something that isn't true, then I will try and share that. And what I'm trying to do today is I went to the museum to see if there's any insight I could have. I saw that red paint on those things and it took me back to my childhood, and I just thought I'd run the numbers. And it turns out the numbers completely discount the evidence in that principal paper. Completely dead in the water. It will not be able to be revived. No, it will not be able to take another breath, right? And that means anyone that has been wasting their time thinking about the Nano-Thermite theory, the second most popular theory, other than the government theory, of what happened on 9/11, they can put that to rest. They can start thinking about other things. The children, when they can next go to the beach. I don't know, what they're cooking for dinner. Just not this Nano-Thermite stuff. It's not a thing, it's dead. Thank you, Matthew Reynolds. Okay, guys, I want to thank you. You've been awesome in your donos today. Really, whoa. So Avalon Connections, really appreciated that £7 pounds 77. Really, Black Tie, a regular contributor, really appreciate that. £10. Phil Dubois, $100, legend. I will use this money. I will use this money to do the control test of the supernova reactor test that I did last year. And I think I'll probably report on that data next because it's quite spectacular. Laszlo, thank you very much for the £5. That's very, very kind of you. Gary Johnson, the £20, very, very generous. John L, £10. It's a pleasure to do this work. Mostly, it's a pleasure to try and help people save life. Verity Hound, very much appreciated the $20. Thank you very much. Matthew Reynolds, again, thank you very much for that £5. Okay. This was ending the Nano-Thermite 9/11 hypothesis for the World Trade Center catastrophe. I'm a volunteer for the Martin Fleischmann Memorial Project. It's the 5th of October 2025. The grey chips are fully explained. They are micaceous iron oxide used in anti-corrosive paints. The red chips part of the red grey chips is a combination of aluminium paste flakes used since the early 1900s in anti-corrosion paints, red iron oxide specific nanoparticle forms as used since the 1950s in replacement of lead oxide in anti-corrosion paints, with a binder of siloxane which accounts for the silicon, carbon and oxygen in the SEMs. The conclusion is all elements and their forms and structures in the red-grey chips have been found to be standard in anti-corrosive paints. Jones et al. Were wrong. There was no nanothermite evidence in the World Trade Center samples. Thank you very much for your time, and I will see you in the next video. Buenas noches, dobronoc, good night.